That's good. Okay. So we are now, probably today, we'll be completing, finally, I guess, the second book of the Torah. We've been reading the Torah, studying the Torah for how many years, starting from the beginning. First book of the Torah unpacks our earliest generations of Hebrews, Abraham and Sarah, Yitzchak and Rivka, Yaakov, his wives, his family. And the first book of the Torah ends with the Jewish migration to Egypt. And it was an honorable migration because one of their own, Joseph, Jacob's son Joseph, is the viceroy of Egypt, and he's welcoming them into the land, and they live with honor. Second book of the Torah, we start off with that, and it quickly descends into how the Egyptians forget what Joseph has done for them, forget the honor and the gratitude they feel for Joseph's family, and they become xenophobic, afraid of the Jews. They say, we have to try to outsmart them. They're going to be a fifth column in our country, and they enslave the Jews. We have the entire Passover narrative, and the redemption and the splitting of the sea, and the receiving of the Torah, which is all one more easily connected narrative. And then that takes us about halfway through the second book of the Torah. And then the Torah pivots. Now that we have a Torah, we got to get to work. Talk about laws, because the Torah is about laws, not about history. And the Torah gives us one Torah portion with an assortment of tens of laws. And then the Torah sticks with laws in a little bit, but in a way it's pivoting back. Torah tells us that there is the need and the mitzvah, the guidance to build a tabernacle, a mishkan, a sanctuary, which would eventually be formalized as the holy temple. But there in the desert, it's mobile, it's temporary. So the last 5 Torah portions of the second book of the Torah are focused primarily on the tabernacle. So we have the instructions of how to build the tabernacle and how to outfit the tabernacle and how to outfit the functionaries in the tabernacle, which are the Kohanes. And then we get these last few Torah portions are a lot about the accounting and finally of how it was done. But just to frame it a little bit before we get into it, to frame into the history of it, the Jews left Egypt, Pesach, it's the spring. 7 weeks later, they get the Torah at Sinai. That's Shavuos. It's usually June. They are encamped at Sinai for many months, because when they're at Sinai, Moses goes, as we've discussed several times, they have the revelation of Sinai. Moses goes up the mountain, says, I'm going up for 40 days. I'm going to come down with tablets. He comes down with the tablets. He sees the Jews misbehaving with the golden calf. He breaks the tablets. The Jews ask for forgiveness. Moses asks God for forgiveness. He goes back up the mountain for another 40 days to ask for a second chance. God says, okay, go back down, make yourself a second, bring up new tablets and of actual stone, like from Home Depot, and I will give you a second tablets. And he goes up for another 40 days. So he's up there for another 2 40-day periods, and he comes down with the second tablets, which symbolize the redemption and the realignment of the Jewish people on Yom Kippur. So it's gone from Pesach to Shavuos. Now in the calendar, already in the fall, they're still camped at Sinai. The day after Yom Kippur, Hashem says, I want you to build a tabernacle. And the tabernacle is going to be, in a way, a place for you to consistently, going forward, to re-experience Sinai. Just like Sinai was a place of open spiritual intimacy with God, just as we were standing, and no one's standing at Mount Sinai questioned whether there's a God. It was like questioning whether there's the air or the tree in front of you. It was a very clear, palpable presence and a very clear, palpable connection. And that very special intimacy was something that we still can find. That's the Sinai experience, that's the temple experience, that's the tabernacle experience. And the tabernacle was a way of creating where we can have not only a physical structure, but enabling us to find our own inner tabernacle, to make space for God within us. And by the way, I've muted all just because of background noise. If you want to ask anything, just go right ahead. Please just unmute yourselves. So they're now day after Yom Kippur, and they start building a tabernacle. Now, if they look up, according to most opinions, if they look up at that point, look up at Mount Sinai, they're still going to see a cloud. The Torah described that when the Jews got the Torah, when they looked at the mountain, they were able to see palpably that there was something divine there. And it was in the form of a divine cloud, something that was visible to the naked eye. Now, when it's in the Torah narrative of that we read months ago of what happened at Sinai, it says that after the Sinai experience, there'll be a blow of the shofar, and then the cloud will dissipate, and then people can go back up the mountain. That actually hasn't happened yet. Again, according to most readings of the Torah, rabbinic readings of the Torah, that still hasn't happened yet. It's still a sacred site. Now they are building the tabernacle, and they finish building it Hanukkah time. Again, there are differences of opinion, but let's go with that opinion. So Hanukkah time, they are now ready to build the tabernacle. The tabernacle is ready to function, and God tells Moses, now hang on. Let's wait. A few months later, as they're approaching the first anniversary of Pesach, so it's a little bit in our calendar today, a month, Purim is a month before Pesach. So roughly 10 days after Purim, God tells Moses, now I want you to start inaugurating the tabernacle. What does that mean? I want you to erect it and deconstruct it every single day for a week. Get into it, get the people into it, get it into the mindset, and start to warm up for the existence of the tabernacle. He does that every day for a week. Then it comes to the first day of Nisan. Pesach every year is the 15th day of Nisan. First day is obviously 2 weeks before that. So now 2 weeks before the first anniversary of Pesach is now going to be what we can call it opening day at the tabernacle. They are still in the Sinai desert. They're still by the mountain. The cloud is still on top of the mountain. They're still living in the aura and the grace and the divine. I don't want to call it a shadow because that's dark. The divine light of Sinai. But now they're building something that is something that where there's going to be a transition of Sinai closer to home into their physical lives. So that begins on the first day of Nisan. So let's go to the bottom of 292. That says erecting the tabernacle. And again, a lot of these last few two Torah portions, there's minimal narrative, and more of it is most of it is more like accounting and finalization. That's why there's going to be very few of the Hasidic insights here, but we'll try to give as much flesh on the bones as possible. Okay, so sixth reading, number 17. Thus it was in Nisan, the first month of 2449. On the Hebrew calendar, 2448 is the year that the Jews left Egypt. So now we're approaching Pesach 2449. the second year after the Exodus, on the first of the month, Rosh Chodesh, that the tabernacle was for the first time erected and not dismantled the same day. As I told you, for a week, starting the 23rd day of Adar, in other words, the month before Nisan, for a week, Moshe had to erect it and dismantle it every single day. Now he erects it and it stays erected. Moses erected the tabernacle, he set up its bases, fitted its planks, inserted its crossbars, erected its pillars. Now, in the non-bolded, we find from Rashi, Moshe, who is a human being, could not lift the planks on his own. But as God had told him, he applied himself to the task, and the planks rose by themselves. And this is also, there is a conceptual resonance to this going forward in history, that often what God wants us to do is to put ourselves to the task, and God will carry the weight for us. Sometimes we look at a task and say, I don't know how I'm going to do this myself. But if we are feeling a conviction that this is something that we really need to do, that it needs to be done, and we are the one to do it, there's no one else to do it, and somehow we need to find a way to get this done, the faith and the trust should be that we can step into Moses' role here, where we do what we can do, and God will be the wind at our back, so to speak. Okay. Number 19, he spread the tent of goat hair sheets over the first covering of the tabernacle, the tapestries, and he placed the ram skin and tachash skin. We spoke about tachash, what kind of animal that was, roof of the tent over it, as God had commanded Moses. Moses, on the right side of 292, then begins to place the furnishings in their proper place inside and outside the tabernacle. Tabernacle is a structure, but inside we have a showbread, we have altars, we have a menorah. Those are our sacred furnishings. He starts to set them up. As soon as he finished positioning each furnishing, he performed the task for which that furnishing was used. So if he set up the menorah, he used it. Even though normally by Jewish law, the individual furnishings would not function unless the entire tabernacle was in place. Conceptually, the tabernacle is one integral unit. And we're not supposed to use one unit unless the entire tabernacle is set and ready to go. This was an outlier. God said, take each one and use them. Special conditions applied to the inaugural process that took place this day. Moshe had officiated as the priest during the 7 consecration days, even though Moshe, and just for our concept and context, Moshe is a Levi. There are 12 or 13 tribes of Israel. One of them is Levi. Cohen is a subset. God has chosen Aaron, Moses' brother, and Aaron's children and future children to be born, to be the Cohen subset. But Moshe is not a Cohen. Moshe is a Levi. But here, Moshe functions as a Cohen, because this is a Cohen's role to lead the service in the tabernacle. And he is functioning here like a Cohen. Like a Kohen Gadol, like a high priest, during the 7 consecration days, performing all the regular daily priestly rites. On the 8th day, the 1st of Nisan, Moshe continues doing this. So there's going to be a transition. Moshe continues until he makes a clean handoff to Aaron, after which he no longer functions as a Kohen, because it was an exception. He's not a Kohen, he's a Levi. He functioned because he's Moshe, and God says, you're a Kohen. You're a Kohen today. But it was a temporary status. Aaron offered only the installation offerings and only began to officiate the regular daily rites the next day, the 2nd day of Nisan. So there is this transition period going on. Going in the 1st day of Nisan is kind of an overlap. Let's go to 293. Moshe takes the tablets of the testimony from the wooden ark he made himself. So here, and then they have this in non-bolded, but if we take a look at the Rashi on earlier different parts of the Torah, when Moshe came down on Yom Kippur, and he had 2nd tablets, they are very holy articles. He brought the stone, but God engraved them. These are very, very high quotient, high-powered divine materials. What's he going to do with them? Where's he put them? His tent. So he made, even though there was no ark yet, God hadn't commanded an ark until the next day, and it wasn't made right away. He made himself, because anything we have that we value, especially something where we have a high divine value, you want to give it the respect of a dedicated place. So he created in his own wooden ark where he kept it, and he kept it in safely. That was where he kept the second tablets. Now that he has a functioning ark, 6 months later, right, going from Yom Kippur to Rosh Chodesh Nisan, beginning of Nisan, he places them in the official ark of the Tabernacle. And as we're going to see, he also put in there, because there was, and then we've discussed it before, I'm sure, when he broke the first tablets, and the first tablets are also divine, and even the stone came from God. What happened with the pieces of stone? So we're told that Moses gathered them up, and he kept them also. So in his little wooden ark, he had the pieces of the first tablets, and he had the second tablets. And now he's able to put them both into the glorious, divinely guided and constructed ark of the covenant. And he placed them in the ark. He positioned the rods on the ark and placed the cover on top of the ark. So the ark, as it's described, it was a gold box within a wood box within a gold box, and it was open from the top. And on top was a heavy gold plate, which was its cover. On top of that, the gold plate, there were the cherubs, whatever. And then there's something that the Torah describes, which is not explained, but there's rods going through. They are attached to the ark, so two people can carry them. And it says, the Torah says, you cannot take those rods out. One might think they're just for carrying. We got to go in the desert. We got to carry it. Put the rods in. We'll carry it. One shoulder. We'll carry it. The rods always had to be there. And one of the things that Talmud tells us is the rods represent us, because the Torah is the blueprint of the world. Torah represents divine wisdom. Torah is God's gift. But Torah, at the end of the day, exists for a purpose, and that's us. And without us, what purpose is who needs the Torah? And even the angels have said they want the Torah. God says, what do you need the Torah for? It's designed, it's a very, very special gift to people living in a human condition, a condition that does not have a clear and palpable godliness, to be able to find meaning in a life where it's not so simple to find meaning. That needs, it's a gift to us. What it requires from us is to pay attention and value and support the Torah. We are the rods who support the Torah. Our commitment to the Torah is what gives the Torah its life, gives the Torah its strength, gives the Torah its lift. So even in the Torah, as we look at a Torah in the synagogue, there's two, not rods like we have it, but there's what we call them atzei chaim. These poles. Eitz chaim means a tree of life. They're wooden, and on either side of the scroll, right, there's the wood that holds it. Those woods are not just a function just because you got to have the parchment attached to something. They represent us. That's the way the Torah is lifted. That's the way the Torah is carried. We are those rods. And the rods, as the Torah says, can never be taken from the ark. They can never be detached from the ark. We can never look at the Torah as its own, it's an independent existence, or as Jews as an independent existence. Jews and Torah are together. Separating one from the other is a prohibition, a violation of Torah, not only in the legal sense, but a violation of Torah thinking. Our ramrod, strong, stiff, unbending commitment to Torah and Torah support and Torah life is what makes us who we are and actually lifts the Torah itself. Okay, go to 21. Moses then brought the ark into the tabernacle and placed a partition curtain so that it would screen the ark of testimony as God had commanded Moses. He then put the broken first set of tablets, is what I mentioned before, into the original wooden ark he had made. This ark preceded the people whenever they traveled and was taken with them into the battlefield when they went to war. Okay, so this is also an important thing. The ark, it's the ark of the Torah. And the ark of the Torah is Torah is it's our spiritual document. It's a gift of God's. It's we call it, the language of it. We take the ark out of the Torah, the Torah out of the ark. We say dracheh darchinoam. Remember me. It's paths of pleasantness. It's a tree of life. And we say chol nesivos shalom. All of its paths are peace. It's a Torah of peace. God wants us to find peace in the world. That's a central part of Torah life. But, when we open the ark, it may be a little jarring if you look at the English. Vayhi bin so Aaron. What is Vayhi bin so Aaron? That's in the 4th book of the Torah. That's a verse that says, when the ark would travel, Moses would say, arise, God, and may your enemies be scattered. And may those who hate you flee from before you. That's not a little, kumbaya, peaceful thing to say. The traveling of the ark is, arise, O God. What does it mean? God's not sitting. The idea is, God, go into battle. And may your enemies be scattered before you. So one of the imageries of the Jews in the desert, and for us that our rabbis designated for thousands of years in synagogues continuously when we open the ark, is that the Torah is for us is a protection. It's a protection for ourselves, because whenever we read in the Torah about impediments, enemies, obstacles, it can be read in many different keys, and it's true at many different levels. But it starts off within us. When we read about Pharaoh in this week's Torah portions, or Amalek, or Haman, first thing we got to do is look at ourselves. Say, where's my Pharaoh? Where's my Haman? Where are the things that in my own personality, my own life, my own behavior, my own distractedness, that present opposition to who I need to be? Using harsh terms, that's the enemy. Not an enemy like Osama bin Laden, but it's not my friend. If there's a part of my personality that disrupts me and distracts me and doesn't allow me or makes it difficult for me to be who I really need to be, that's a problem, because I am best and I am happiest when I'm living with full energy and full presence and full attention to my own capacities and utilizing my capacities, so I'm being useful to the world. When there's something that gets in the way, at the end of the day, it's working against my interests. It's going to work against my own happiness. It's going to work against my own fulfillment in life. Is it harsh to call that something that hates me? Yeah, there's no one to talk about that. Or an enemy? But at the same time, it is in its subtle sense. So when the Jews are traveling the desert, they literally had tribes around them who wanted to kill them, who wanted to attack them. Where did their safety come from? Safety came from God. And as they traveled, Moshe would say, at one level, in the literal sense, God, we're traveling through the desert now. And there are people who are waiting around looking for opportunities to find vulnerabilities to come after us. God, rise and let your enemies be scattered before you. He was talking about the Amalekites and the Girgashites and the Jebusites, all of that. True. But we're not in the desert anymore. And I'm not worried about Amalekites and Jebusites and all those guys. Those ites are gone. At least from as far as they're not here. But the idea is that when we open the ark, we're still going to say that because the ark opening means the revelation of the Torah. That's our Torah for our lives. The Torah itself, looking at the Torah is not magically going to do this for you, but it'll bring it to mind of what we can do with the Torah to be able to scatter our own distractions or our own impediments, to be able to clear our own path forward in life. And this is what we say, the ark preceded the people wherever they traveled and was taken with them into the battlefields when they went to war. That's true. That way you're talking about physical war there in the desert, but it's not only about that, it's about war. Life is a war. The Zohar tells us, it says every prayer is a time of war. Why? Because we're battling ourselves. To find right concentration, to find proper connection, to be able to unburden ourselves of the things that are jumping through our minds, are pulling our attention, our sensitivities away, so that we can find calm, connected intimacy with God. That's not as simple as it sounds, and therefore, prayer is a time when we wrestle with ourselves, and Torah is a very helpful asset for us to be able to find that clarity. 22. He placed the table in the tent of meeting on the northern side of the tabernacle outside the curtain. He then set up an arrangement of showbread on it before God. There was we went through it. There was in the temple, there was this elaborate table of showbread, challahs, that was always there before God, as God had commanded Moses, even though it was Sunday. The first day of Nisan now is Rosh Chodesh Nissan. That was a Sunday. Showbread is normally laid out on the table only on Shabbos, and it was there a whole week from Shabbos to Shabbos. But here, because there's a lot of outliers going on here, a lot of exceptions going on, he says, lay it out on a Sunday, because it's opening day. He placed the candelabra in the tent of meeting opposite the table on the southern side of the tabernacle. There was always the showbreads were on the north side. If we're facing the ark, and the sanctuary, the Holy of Holies, to the right, which would be to the right is the south. That would be the candelabrum, and to the north is the showbreads. Then he placed it on the southern side of the tabernacle. He then lit the lamps before God, as God had commanded Moses, even though it was morning, and the lamps were normally lit only in the evening. Here also another outlier. Placed the golden altar in the tent of meeting on the front of the curtain. He then burned an incense offering on it, as God had commanded Moses. Incense offering was also a big deal in the future service, and Moses did it. Here, though, he burned it once in the morning and once again in the evening, in accordance with normal practice. There was no exception to normal practice in case of the incense. there was exceptions and other things here. There was no need for an exception. 28. He placed the entrance screen for the tabernacle. He then placed the sacrificial altar in front of the entrance of the tabernacle, a tent of meeting, and upon it he sacrificed the daily ascent offering, that's an accompanying grain offering, and libation, as God had commanded Moses. He placed the laver. Laver was a big vessel for the Kohen. Anybody coming into the temple before their service, they would wash their hands between the tent of meeting, the altar, and put water in it for washing. That's the way the service would begin, and that's one of the reasons we begin our day every day with washing our hands. Also, in the same way, we wash alternately, right, left, right, left, right, left, and that is preparing for our day like the Kohen prepared for the Kohen's day, because our day is also a day of service. Our day, we're not sitting in a physical tabernacle, but we see it as no less important and holy than the Kohen's. And just as the Kohen would begin the day with the laver, we begin our day with washing our hands. From it, Moses and Aaron's sons would wash their hands and feet. Moses on that day only, Aaron and his sons on that day only. They would wash whenever they entered the tent of meeting or drew near to the altar, as God had commanded Moses. Moses then set up the courtyard surrounding the tabernacle on the altar, and he placed the screen of the entrance of the courtyard. With this, Moses completed the work. And then Aaron then performed the inauguration rites, as will be described later on, in detail later on. So there's an interesting point, is that there was and then we'll go to 294. Moses, it's opening day. He's got a lot to do. It's a new reality for the Jewish people, something that's going to be. I have a little light here that I'm supposed to use, so I don't know, make it easier for you to see. He has this. He's starting off with the tabernacle. It's going to be something that the Jews are going to be using for hundreds of years, and together with the temple. It's launching a whole new chapter of Judaism. He's getting it started. Now he also has to inaugurate the Kohens. He has to go, and this has to be a public thing too. Talmud tells us that he waited an extra day because he wanted to make sure to give it its proper due. There is a sensitivity in Torah thinking, in halacha, about making sure that everything has its proper space and time, and that we're not infringing on the space and time, which could ultimately infringe on the importance of it. So, for example, we're last year, 2 years ago, I did 2 weddings consecutively for 2 daughters of one family. Both got engaged at the same time, and so I had to do 1 week after the other. I did thank God, did the chuppah, but it was 1 week after the other. By Jewish law, we had to do one daughter's wedding, finish the entire 7 days of celebration, Sheva Brachas, and then, only then, could we marry the second one. Why? Do one, and then the next day. If we did the other one the next day, the first one would have, or for sure, both of them would have their days of joy somewhat impeded upon by their sisters. And you can call that there's a psychological concern, and it is, but it's actually a halachic concern, because we want to make sure that everything has its due place, has its and its due respect, because these things mean things. And if a wedding means something, if Sheva Brachas means something, let's have it and not impede it, and not crowd it out. So Moshe, he's launching opening day of the tabernacle. He's afraid, maybe afraid is not the right word, he's concerned that crowding that in with inaugurating the Kohen, something's going to get lost. people will focus on the tabernacle and only partially on the Kohen, focus on the Kohen, only partially on the tabernacle. They're two huge things. Sorry about that. They're two huge things, and therefore he's not ready to gather them together, to bunch them together, and therefore he with divine consent, he ends up separating them by a day. Rosh Chodesh, he inaugurates the tabernacle, and then he gets into the inauguration of the Kohen of Aaron and his sons. Okay. Now to the home stretch of the second book, page 294. We're going to finish it today. The cloud covered the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Now, this, as I told you in the beginning of the class, according to most opinions, since we know for sure that they're still sitting at camped at the Sinai desert, but the Sinai mountain still has the cloud of God still at the top from last year Shavuos, from when they got the Torah. Sinai, the resonance, the divine resonance of Sinai, and the palpable, the physically, visible holiness of Sinai is still there. Now, they see a transition. The cloud comes off the mountain and it covers the tent of meeting, which is another obvious and visible sign that the holiness of Sinai has now transitioned to the tabernacle, and they can see it in the cloud. Now, one of the things, just to throw in, is that when in one of the interactions we read several months ago, in the interactions with God after Moses has with God after the breaking of the tablets, and Moses asking for God for a new license on the relationship, he says to God, and I don't have the verse in front of me, I could bring it up, but it says, I'm asking you, God, that we be different, that we have some special sign from you, and our Jewish people, that we be uplifted. And one of the things that the rabbis tell us is that the idea that they were able to, everybody in the camp, millions of people, there had to be some people who weren't the greatest in the world, everybody was able to see that cloud. That cloud represented the divine. And that was a fulfillment of God's agreement to Moses that, yes, I'm gonna let you be different. I'm going to give you a leg up here. I'm going to let you not wonder about God, but to be able to see the divine in a palpable way. And here the cloud covers the tent of meeting, and the glory of God filled the tabernacle. Now, in 35, it says, Moses could not enter the tent of meeting since the cloud had rested on it. And we're going to find more of this going through. There's this balance, the cloud's resting on it. Moses is respecting space also. He only goes in if God calls him in. And God's glory filled the tabernacle. When God withdrew the cloud, Moses could enter and converse with God. Okay. The tabernacle remained in place from the 1st of Nisan to the 20th of Iyar. So as we end this book of the Torah, we're ending it on the 1st of Nisan. The 20th of Iyar is only 10 days before the first anniversary of when they came to the Sinai desert. So let's remember this. The year 2448, Jews leave Egypt on the Pesach time, 15th of Nisan. And they travel, and then the Torah tells us that on the first day of Sivan, first day of the third month, they come to the Sinai desert. And 6 days later, they get the Torah. That's the first day of Sivan. The month before that is Iyar. So they're not going to leave the Sinai desert until the next 20th of Iyar. They are in the Sinai desert for almost an entire year minus 10 days. Thereafter, whenever the cloud rose up from above the tabernacle, the Israelites would embark on all their journeys. And if the cloud did not rise, they would not travel until the day it rose. For wherever they camped, the cloud of God was above the tabernacle by day, and the fire would be there by night. This is something that it's something emblazoned on the Jewish memory, and something we refresh our memory every year. Sukkot. When we go outside Sukkot to live in a sukkah, what we're doing is we're seeing the sukkah as God's protection. We're outside, and it represents God. The schach on top of the sukkah represents God's protection. What it says actually is it represents clouds of glory. That's what the Talmud tells us. Jewish law says the clouds that protected us are embodied by the schach. So Sukkot is really not only about the clouds. It's about us remembering how we lived in the wilderness for 40 years, totally vulnerable, living on manna, protected by clouds, by a pillar of fire, and everything we have, all of our security and protection comes from God. And every year, we take an exercise to say, yes, right now, thank God, I have my own 401k, and I have my own roof over my head, and I take care of myself, which I should. Torah wants me to do. But to remember that God is still the one taking care of us fully through the conduits of our 401k and our job and our Sloman's security system, whatever else we have. So here, it ends off and says the cloud of God is above the tabernacle by day, and the fire would be there by night. That's the tabernacle was really the entire camp, visible to the entire house of Israel at all stations of their journeys. Now, what's interesting is just to throw in, it says you see the stations of their journeys is not bolded, because what it says is all their journeys. Truth is, their journeys, they didn't see something. While they were journeying, they didn't see this necessarily. It was more when they were camped. But a language that you will see through the Torah, when it describes the Jewish journey and journeys in the desert, is that even the encampments are called journeys. And that means that journey means growth. Journey means we're not staying in one place. Journey means we're transitioning from one stage to the next. Sometimes we're actively trying to move ourselves from place A to place B today. Woke up in the morning and said, I want to try and be that much more focused, prioritized, gentle, whatever it is today. Maybe that was yesterday. And today, I'm really going to focus on more internalizing it, not moving to a new exercise, but to stay in one place, so to speak, but to internalize something to make sure it stays a good habit, not just a flash in the pan yesterday. One could call that a stationary day, but it's not a stationary day. It's a day of progress. It's a day of progress in not moving from place to place, but moving deeper into myself and internalizing something that I need to internalize. And there is this clear sign from how the Torah discusses the 40 years in the desert, in that encampments are also called journeys. Those encampments were not a time off of mobility. It was just a different type of mobility. So we concluded this. This is the second book of the Torah, and in synagogue is traditional for thousands of years. all over the world, that when we conclude a book of the Torah, the reader finishes the last few words in a high note. So where there's some more of a dramatic flourish, and then the congregation wishes as chazak, chazak, v'nis chazek, which we say be strong and let us strengthen each other. And that goes back to the idea that Torah gives us strength. And as the Torah itself says, this is a source of our strength. And when in completing a book, we want to take from it the wisdom and the insight, the strength to be able to have there some type of behavioral change, that there be a shift in our lives for the better, and that takes strength, because the power of inertia can be crushing. And we wish each other be strong, let us strengthen each other to be able to embody Torah values. The next thing is Vayikra. I think before we go to Vayikra, maybe just take a few minutes here, because I don't know if we have to start it right now. I would just, unless there are any questions, there's a famous book. The Jews have we've had an interesting ride through millennia, and the unfolding of Jewish scholarship from Israel, Babylonia, and into Europe is a fascinating story of how that all developed, and how Torah not only survived but thrived through very difficult times. And in different communities, when you could have a Torah stronghold in Babylonia, but that didn't translate necessarily into Torah wisdom, in the next country necessarily, because there would be the question of travel, and there were even books only began towards the end of the Babylonian period of the Gaonim. I mean, not books, not even parchments. Written Torah, writing down the oral Torah. So in the 1500s, there was a very strong Jewish community in Constantinople, Turkey, and it was a very strong Sephardic one. And so there was Jewish life was very strong, but Jewish scholarship was not very strong. So there was a very, I think we call him a very heroic rabbi who came from Israel, and he was there in Constantinople. His name was Rabbi Yaakov Kuli. Yaakov Kuli spoke Ladino. Ladino was, it was like the Sephardic Yiddish. Yiddish was a kind of a corrupted German, or something of a Germanic vernacular that became peculiar to the Jewish community. Ladino, L-I-D-I-N-O, I don't know if you've heard of it. That was an equivalent in the Sephardic community. And he spoke Ladino, and he taught in Ladino, and he saw the thirst for people, especially in that community where people really wanted to live Judaically, but they knew very little, and they couldn't read Hebrew, and they didn't understand the Torah when it was, even if they came to Shul Shabbos, and they did. So he wrote an anthology, a masterful anthology, which he didn't finish totally in his lifetime. It was finished by a student later, but it's a very, very extensive anthology. It's called Me'am Loes. Me'am Loes is a phrase. It's two words from the Psalms, but it means it can mean the vernacular of the nation, or a nation that speaks its vernacular. So he wrote, it may be, he's one of the first, if not the first, to write a user-friendly language speaking, as far as language is concerned, a user-friendly entryway for the Jewish community into understanding the weekly Torah portion. And it's heroic in the sense you think in those days that he was really just trying to make sure that your average Jewish family, parents and children, could sit down Friday night and have a Torah thought in a language they understood, which was Ladino, and it's since been translated into Hebrew. And it's probably one of a set of books I got as a young teenager, and I still have that set, and I look at it from time to time. And I was just looking at it now this morning to see about how he deals with the end of this week, the Torah portion, what we're studying. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Yaakov Kuli did was he took the opportunity at different points of the Torah to sometimes throw in something that wasn't an interpretation of the Torah per se, but it was a few pages of halachic guidance. So if I have people's attention, this week's Torah portion, and it's related to some laws, I'm going to throw in laws. So what he does at the end of the Torah portion we're reading here is he throws in, so it's not respectful language, he inserts laws of the synagogue. Because the synagogue, the Torah tells us, the Talmud tells us, synagogue is a mini sanctuary. And if we're talking about the tabernacle, and he's thinking about these people in Constantinople and Turkey, and they're sitting at their Friday night table, so now that we've presented the majestic tabernacle, understand you have a majestic tabernacle. There isn't the cloud there. There isn't the menorah like there was in the tabernacle in the temple. But when you go to Shul, in the language of the Talmud, that's a mikdash ma'at. That's a mini tabernacle, a mini sanctuary. And he lists some user-friendly ideas for them. Doesn't get very technical, but about their synagogue. So I figured we'd just point out some things because he points out a few. One thing is that a synagogue is meant for us. It's meant to be a place of reverence, and therefore it's something that we have to be very careful to treat it that way. In our new sanctuary, where we would like to use the entire sanctuary and social hall for Purim parties and so on, we've come up with a way to like wall off the ark so that we can shift it into a social hall, because when the ark is visible, there has to be that it has that persona, so to speak, of the sanctuary, and it has to be treated that way. And one of the things is that we have to be very careful about how we treat that room, what we do in that room. And just like we have to be careful about breaking anything, doing anything that's untoward in the tabernacle, temple of old. We have to be careful within a synagogue. One of the things that he writes about it in the synagogue, and this isn't firm, fast law, he says every synagogue should have windows towards the top of the room so you can see the heavens. Now, eye level is not actually considered a great idea, because that's distracting. You're trying to daven, you look outside, you see people, you see something. But higher than eye level, so you can see the heavens, is a good thing. He actually writes one should never daven in the basement, in a windowless room. That's not law. You can daven in a windowless room. But what he was writing for his parishioners there is to try to get a feeling of nature, not in a distracting way, but that is an optimal way that the Talmud describes it. We want to be able to see the heavens, because obviously the heavens aren't the clouds, but to be able to feel the majesty of nature, the greatness of it. And one of the points that we had to deal with here also is that you cannot, if the time comes where you have to deconstruct the shul, you have to demolish it. That happens. You can't demolish a shul until you've dedicated somewhere else to daven. and because it's a special place. How can a community just be without a shul? If it's without a shul, it's without a shul. But if you have it, you can't just take it away. You first have to dedicate somewhere else. So when we built this building, we first had to have a place where we could daven before we could take down the old house. It took us a little while, but it's not just about the building. It's about the psycho-spiritual space it takes up within our hearts and minds. Because at the end of the day, just to wrap this up, we're talking about a sanctuary. We're talking about a tabernacle. We're talking about a presence of God. We're talking about a cloud of God. This isn't just a place for us to gather and have gefilte fish and meet friends. That's great. I like that. But it's a very special. We should have special spiritual holy places in our lives. Whether we can visit them often or not, something else. There's COVID. There's something else, but we need to have it. And the tabernacle drives that home to us. It's not something just that was. That needs to continue to be. So I'll leave that here. Is there any questions?
Mendy,
Yes.
I just found out a friend of mine from the Villages who was, when you talked about the Ladino, she's Ladino, and her great grandfather was the one that wrote the Shulchan Aruch, Rabbi Joseph ben Ephraim Caro.
Really?
And she mentioned it, but I was just so amazed because she knows very little about it. And I made her aware of how important. Unfortunately, she didn't grow up with very much of anything, but I enlightened her about the importance of who her grandfather was. And I was just so amazed that I know someone who comes from such a background.
It's beautiful, Helen. You know something? You could do Rabbi Caro a great favor and call her up today and study some Torah.
I'm going to call her up and tell her, because it's just amazing, that she didn't know any. I've known her for 8 years, and she just happened to mention that her great grandfather was, a very important rabbi. Wow. And when she mentioned the name, I looked it up. She didn't even know that he wrote the Shulchan Aruch. Sure. So I got a learning experience from someone.
That's great.
Else. So it was, when you mentioned that, it just triggered that. So I will tell her today. Thank you.
Everyone else have a great week.
Yeah, thank you.
Well,
that's great.
Be well, everybody.
Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Bye.